The dust devil spiraled across the barren wasteland, carrying with it the desperate cries of children who should have been safe in their beds. But safety was a luxury these 7 orphans had never known, and tonight, under the merciless desert stars, they faced their darkest hour. What started as a routine transport from the St. Catherine's Children's Home in Denver had become a nightmare that would shake the very foundations of the Colorado Territory. The year was 1887, and in the unforgiving landscape between Denver and Pueblo, a conspiracy so twisted was about to unfold that it would test the limits of human cruelty and divine intervention. Mrs. Gertrude Blackwood, the stern headmistress of St. Catherine's, had personally selected these particular children for what she called a special placement opportunity. 7 souls, ranging in age from 6 to 14, had been loaded onto a covered wagon with nothing but the clothes on their backs and promises of new families waiting for them in the growing settlement of Trinidad. But as the wagon wheels turned and Denver faded into memory, the children had no idea they were passengers on a journey to nowhere, victims of a scheme that would leave them stranded in the most desolate stretch of the American frontier. The first hook came in the form of young Timothy Morrison, a 12-year-old with eyes too old for his face, who noticed something peculiar about their driver. Jake Morrison, no relation despite sharing the same surname, had been hired specifically for this transport, but his nervous glances and constant checking of his pocket watch suggested this was no ordinary delivery. Timothy had learned to read people during his 4 years at the orphanage, a skill that had kept him alive when food was scarce and bigger children preyed on the weak. Something about Jake's demeanor set off every alarm bell in the boy's survival-hardened mind. The driver kept muttering under his breath, phrases that made Timothy's blood run cold when he caught fragments like, "too young to understand," and "they'll never find them out there." As night fell and the wagon continued past the usual camping spots, Timothy realized with growing horror that they weren't heading toward any settlement at all, but deeper into the Badlands where even the Apache feared to tread. The second hook emerged when the wagon suddenly stopped in the middle of nowhere, 15 miles from the nearest water source, with nothing but sagebrush and rattlesnake dens stretching to the horizon. Jake Morrison's hands trembled as he unhitched the horses, his face pale in the moonlight as he avoided looking at the confused children clustering behind him. "This is where you get out," he announced, his voice barely audible above the desert wind. The children stared in disbelief as the reality of their situation began to dawn on them. There was no settlement here, no waiting families, nothing but endless wasteland that had claimed countless lives over the decades. Sarah Chun, the oldest at 14 and the unofficial leader of the group, stepped forward with a courage that belied her small frame. "Mr. Morrison, there's been some mistake. We're supposed to go to Trinidad, to our new families." But Jake could only shake his head, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks as he climbed back onto the wagon seat. "I'm sorry, children. God forgive me. I'm so sorry." With a crack of his whip, he drove away into the darkness, leaving 7 children alone under the vast Colorado sky with nothing but their terror and each other. The conspiracy behind this abandonment reached far deeper than a simple case of kidnapping or human trafficking. Mrs. Blackwood had discovered that St. Catherine's was about to undergo a federal inspection, one that would reveal years of financial mismanagement and abuse. Rather than face the consequences of her actions, she had devised a horrific solution to make her problems disappear forever. These 7 children had been selected because they had no living relatives, no one to ask questions when they failed to arrive at their supposed destination. The official records would show they had been successfully placed with families in Trinidad, complete with forged adoption papers and fabricated correspondence. By the time anyone discovered the truth, if they ever did, Mrs. Blackwood would be long gone with the substantial sum she had embezzled from the orphanage's operating funds. But she had made one critical error in her planning, one that would ultimately lead to her downfall and the children's salvation. What Mrs. Blackwood didn't know was that her conversation with Jake Morrison about the job had been overheard by Samuel "Black Sam" Rodriguez, a former cavalry scout turned drifter who had been sleeping off a drunk in the orphanage's stable. Sam had served with distinction in the Apache Wars, earning his nickname not from his Mexican heritage but from his ability to track through the darkest nights and most treacherous terrain. Something about the conversation had struck him as wrong, deeply wrong, and his soldier's instincts had compelled him to follow the wagon at a distance, staying just close enough to keep the dust cloud in sight without being detected. When he witnessed the abandonment, Sam faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could ride away and pretend he had seen nothing, or he could risk everything to save 7 children he had never met. For a man who had lost his own family to a Comanche raid years earlier, there was really no choice at all. The children's first night in the desert was a test of survival that would have broken grown men. Without water, exposed to the bitter cold that followed the scorching day, they huddled together like cubs abandoned by their mother. Little Emma Kowalski, only 6 years old and the youngest of the group, cried until she had no tears left, her small body shaking with a combination of fear and the desert chill. The older children took turns holding her, sharing what little warmth their thin clothing could provide. Timothy had found a small outcropping of rocks that provided some shelter from the wind, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. They needed water, food, and most importantly, they needed rescue before the desert claimed them as it had claimed so many others. As dawn broke over the wasteland, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful under other circumstances, the children faced the terrifying reality of their situation. They were lost in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth, with no supplies, no experience, and rapidly diminishing hope. Sam Rodriguez had spent the night tracking, following the wagon's path and noting every detail that might help him understand the full scope of the conspiracy. By dawn, he had pieced together enough of the puzzle to know that these children were victims of something far more sinister than a simple abandonment. The precision of the location, the careful timing of the departure, the fact that Jake Morrison had known exactly where to go despite having never been to this particular stretch of desert before, all pointed to a carefully planned operation. Sam's military training kicked in as he began to formulate a rescue plan that would not only save the children but also expose the truth behind their predicament. He had 2 advantages that Mrs. Blackwood couldn't have anticipated: his exceptional tracking skills and his intimate knowledge of every water source, cave, and shelter within a 100-mile radius of their location. But time was running out, and 7 young lives hung in the balance. The mystery deepened when Sam discovered that Jake Morrison hadn't acted alone in the abandonment. Fresh horse tracks around the area indicated that at least 2 other riders had been present during the drop-off, watching from a distance to ensure the job was completed as planned. This revelation transformed what Sam had initially assumed was the desperate act of a conflicted man into something far more calculated and sinister. Someone had paid Morrison and his accomplices to commit this atrocity, and the military precision of the operation suggested a level of planning that pointed to Mrs. Blackwood's involvement. But Sam also discovered something else, something that filled him with both hope and urgency. The tracks led not back toward Denver as expected, but southeast toward the mining camps of the Spanish Peaks region. This suggested that the conspirators might still be in the area, possibly waiting to confirm that their plan had succeeded before fleeing the territory forever. As the sun climbed higher on that first day, the children's situation became increasingly desperate. The desert heat was merciless, and without proper protection, they were already showing signs of dehydration and heat exhaustion. Sarah Chun had taken charge of rationing their saliva and finding what little shade the sparse vegetation could provide. But she knew these measures would only delay the inevitable. Young Benjamin Adams, an 8-year-old who had survived on the streets of Denver before coming to the orphanage, surprised everyone by producing a small folding knife he had kept hidden since his arrival. "My pa gave me this before he died," he explained, his voice barely a whisper. "Said it might save my life someday." The knife became their most precious tool, allowing them to cut strips of cloth for head coverings and to dig small depressions in the sand where they might find slightly cooler earth to rest against. But tools and ingenuity could only do so much against the brutal reality of their situation. Sam's rescue mission began with a calculated risk that demonstrated both his tactical brilliance and his deep commitment to saving the children. Rather than approaching directly, which might alert any remaining conspirators to his presence, he decided to create a diversion that would draw attention away from the children's location while simultaneously gathering intelligence about the full scope of the conspiracy. He had noticed smoke from a campfire about 3 miles southeast of where the children had been abandoned, and his instincts told him this was where he would find answers. Using skills honed during years of military service, Sam approached the camp under cover of darkness, moving through the desert like a ghost, despite his considerable size. What he discovered there would shock him to his core and reveal the true depths of human depravity behind the children's abandonment. The campfire belonged to Jake Morrison and 2 other men, and their conversation revealed the horrifying truth about the conspiracy. Mrs. Blackwood had not only arranged for the children's abandonment but had also paid the men to ensure they never survived to tell their story. The original plan had been to leave the children in the desert and return 3 days later to confirm their deaths, creating an unshakable alibi for everyone involved. Morrison was having second thoughts about the arrangement, his conscience finally catching up with him, but his 2 companions, brothers named Dutch and Pike Hennessy, showed no such remorse. Those brats were dead the minute they stepped into that wagon, Dutch was saying as Sam listened from the shadows. We're just making sure nature takes its course without any complications. The callousness of the statement filled Sam with a rage he hadn't felt since the day he'd found his own family's bodies. But he forced himself to remain calm and gather as much information as possible. The plot twist that would change everything came when Sam overheard Dutch Hennessy reading from a telegram he had received earlier that day. The message was from Mrs. Blackwood, and it contained instructions that made Sam's blood run cold. The federal inspection of St. Catherine's had been moved up by a full week, and Mrs. Blackwood needed confirmation of the children's deaths immediately so she could finalize her escape plans. More shocking still was the revelation that this wasn't the first time such an arrangement had been made. Over the past 2 years, at least 12 other children had been subjected to similar fates, their disappearances covered up by fabricated adoption records and carefully constructed lies. The telegram also revealed that Mrs. Blackwood had already purchased train tickets to San Francisco under an assumed name, with plans to board a ship to Australia where she would start a new life with her stolen fortune. The children currently dying in the desert were just the final loose ends in a conspiracy that had been claiming young lives for years. This revelation transformed Sam's mission from a simple rescue operation into something far more complex and dangerous. He wasn't just trying to save 7 children. He was potentially the only person who could expose a systematic murder conspiracy and prevent future victims. But his first priority remained the immediate survival of the children, and as he listened to the 3 conspirators plan their return to confirm the deaths, he realized he had less than 48 hours to execute a plan that would save the children and capture the criminals. The military tactician in him began to formulate a strategy that would accomplish both objectives, but it would require precision timing, considerable risk, and a hefty dose of frontier justice. Sam slipped away from the conspirators' camp as silently as he had arrived, his mind already working through the complex logistics of what he was about to attempt. The children's second day in the desert brought them face to face with their mortality in ways that would haunt their dreams for years to come. Emma Kowalski had stopped crying, not from any sense of peace but because her small body no longer had the moisture to produce tears. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and she moved with the listless shuffle of someone whose body was beginning to shut down. Timothy Morrison, despite his own deteriorating condition, had appointed himself her primary caretaker, carrying her when she could no longer walk and sharing his meager saliva when she became delirious with thirst. The other children rallied around their youngest member, each contributing what little they could to keep her alive, but they all understood the grim mathematics of their situation. Without water, they had perhaps another day before the strongest among them would begin to succumb, and Emma might not survive another night. Sarah Chen's leadership became increasingly crucial as the children's physical condition deteriorated and panic threatened to destroy their cohesion. She organized them into a system where they took turns providing shade for each other, rotated responsibilities for watching over Emma, and maintained a careful rationing of their remaining energy. Her background as the daughter of Chinese immigrants who had faced their own share of hardship on the frontier had prepared her for adversity in ways the other children couldn't match. She knew that survival often came down to mental toughness as much as physical resources, and she worked tirelessly to keep the group's spirits up even as their bodies began to fail. "Help is coming," she assured them, though she had no evidence to support this claim. "Someone will find us." Her confidence became a lifeline for the others, giving them a reason to endure just a few more hours in circumstances that would have broken many adults. Sam's approach to the children's location was masterful in its execution, demonstrating the skills that had made him one of the most effective scouts in the cavalry. He moved during the pre-dawn hours when the desert was coolest and visibility was limited, carrying with him precious water and supplies that could mean the difference between life and death for the 7 young survivors. But he also carried something else. Evidence of the conspiracy that could bring Mrs. Blackwood and her accomplices to justice. During his surveillance of the criminals' camp, he had managed to steal the telegram from Mrs. Blackwood along with other documents that proved the systematic nature of their crimes. Getting this evidence to the proper authorities would be crucial, but first he had to ensure the children survived long enough to serve as witnesses to what had been done to them. The moment Sam crested the small ridge overlooking the children's makeshift shelter, he was struck by a sight that would remain burned into his memory forever. 7 small figures huddled in whatever shade they could find, their clothes torn and dusty, their faces gaunt with dehydration and despair. But what struck him most was their organization, the way they had instinctively formed a protective circle around their weakest member, sharing their suffering as much as their meager resources. It reminded him of soldiers he had known, men who had faced impossible odds and found strength in their bonds with each other. These children had been abandoned to die, but they had refused to surrender their humanity or their hope. Sam felt a surge of pride for these young survivors mixed with renewed determination to ensure their rescue was just the beginning of the justice they deserved. Sam's arrival marked the turning point in the children's ordeal, but his approach was careful and deliberate. He understood that children who had been through such trauma might be suspicious of any adult, especially one appearing suddenly in the desert like an apparition. He announced himself from a distance, his voice carrying clearly in the thin desert air. "Children, my name is Sam Rodriguez. I've brought water and I'm here to help you." The effect on the children was immediate and profound. Emma Kowalski lifted her head for the first time in hours, while Timothy Morrison struggled to his feet, hardly daring to believe that rescue had finally arrived. Sarah Chen's careful composure finally cracked, and tears of relief streamed down her dust-covered cheeks as she realized their nightmare might finally be coming to an end. But Sam knew that getting them to safety was only the first challenge. Exposing the conspiracy that had put them here would require careful planning and considerable courage from all of them. The reunion between Sam and the children was both heartbreaking and inspiring, revealing the full extent of their suffering, while also demonstrating their remarkable resilience. As Sam distributed water and basic medical care, he listened to their story and began to understand the full scope of what they had endured. Timothy Morrison's account of Jake Morrison's behavior during the journey provided crucial details that corroborated Sam's own observations about the conspiracy. Sarah Chen's natural leadership abilities impressed Sam, and he realized she could be a key ally in the plan he was formulating to bring the criminals to justice. Even young Emma, despite her critical condition, was able to provide details about conversations she had overheard at the orphanage that shed new light on Mrs. Blackwood's systematic abuse of the children in her care. The rescue operation required Sam to balance immediate medical needs with strategic considerations that would ensure the children's long-term safety and justice for their tormentors. He had enough supplies to stabilize the children's condition, but moving them to safety while avoiding detection by the conspirators would require careful timing and route selection. Sam's military experience proved invaluable as he developed a plan that would get the children to safety, while also positioning them to help expose the full extent of the conspiracy. He explained to the older children that their ordeal wasn't over yet, that they would need to be brave for just a little longer to ensure that Mrs. Blackwood and her accomplices faced justice for their crimes. The children's response demonstrated a maturity and courage that humbled the veteran scout, as they unanimously agreed to do whatever was necessary to prevent other children from suffering the same fate. The journey to safety became an epic of endurance and determination that tested everyone involved. Sam had cached supplies at strategic points along a route he had scouted years earlier, but moving 7 weakened children across 20 miles of desert terrain while avoiding detection required every skill he had learned during his military service. The children rose to the challenge with a spirit that amazed their rescuer, supporting each other when their strength failed and maintaining the discipline necessary to avoid detection by their would-be killers. Timothy Morrison proved to have remarkable stamina for someone his age, while Sarah Chen's organizational skills helped maintain group cohesion during the most difficult portions of the journey. Even little Emma, carried much of the way by her older companions, contributed by remaining quiet during the most dangerous passages and providing encouragement when spirits flagged. The climax of the conspiracy came when Dutch and Pike Hennessy returned to the abandonment site expecting to find 7 small bodies ready for burial in unmarked graves. Instead, they found clear evidence that the children had been rescued, along with signs that their campsite had been under surveillance. The panic that followed revealed the full extent of their criminal network, as they attempted to contact Mrs. Blackwood and coordinate an escape plan that would keep them all out of federal prison. But Sam had anticipated this reaction and had already set in motion a series of events that would ensure none of the conspirators escaped justice. Using his knowledge of telegraph lines and mail routes, he had arranged for evidence of the conspiracy to reach federal marshals in Denver at the same time the children would arrive to give their testimony. Mrs. Blackwood's downfall began when she received an unexpected visitor at St. Catherine's on the very day she had planned to disappear forever. Federal Marshal James Patterson had received Sam's evidence package along with a detailed account of the conspiracy, and he had moved quickly to prevent the headmistress from escaping. The confrontation between Mrs. Blackwood and the marshal revealed the full scope of her crimes, as investigators discovered evidence of systematic abuse, financial fraud, and the disappearance of dozens of children over the past several years. Her carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbled under the weight of overwhelming evidence, and her attempts to deny involvement were undermined by the detailed documentation Sam had gathered and the testimony of the surviving children. The trial that followed became one of the most sensational criminal cases in Colorado Territory history, drawing attention from newspapers across the country and highlighting the plight of orphaned children throughout the American frontier. Mrs. Blackwood, Jake Morrison, and the Hennessy brothers were all convicted on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to federal fraud, with sentences that ensured they would spend the rest of their lives in prison. But the trial also revealed systematic failures in the oversight of charitable institutions that allowed such abuses to occur, leading to reforms in the territorial government's approach to child welfare that would protect future generations of vulnerable children. The children themselves became symbols of resilience and courage, their survival story inspiring reforms in orphan care throughout the American West. Sarah Chun was adopted by a prominent Denver family and eventually became one of the first Chinese-American women to practice law in Colorado, dedicating her career to protecting the rights of vulnerable children. Timothy Morrison was taken in by Sam Rodriguez himself, who discovered that fatherhood suited him better than the solitary life he had been leading. The boy's natural intelligence and determination, combined with Sam's guidance and support, led him to become a successful rancher and community leader who never forgot the lessons learned during those terrible days in the desert. Emma Kowalski's recovery was the most dramatic of all the children, as her near-death experience had left her with lasting health issues that required ongoing medical care. However, her adoption by a Denver physician and his wife led to a life dedicated to helping others, as she eventually became a nurse who specialized in caring for abandoned and abused children. The other children also found loving homes and successful lives, but they remained connected to each other and to Sam Rodriguez, forming a bond that lasted for the rest of their lives and served as a testament to the power of human resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. The legacy of the desert rescue extended far beyond the immediate participants, as the case led to significant reforms in child welfare policies throughout the American frontier. The systematic nature of Mrs. Blackwood's crimes had revealed gaps in oversight and regulation that allowed vulnerable children to disappear without adequate investigation or follow-up. New laws were passed requiring regular federal inspection of orphanages and other charitable institutions, with severe penalties for administrators who failed to account for children in their care. The case also led to improved communication between law enforcement agencies and better tracking systems for child placements, making it much more difficult for future conspirators to exploit the system. Sam Rodriguez became something of a folk hero following the rescue, though he himself never sought publicity or recognition for his actions. His military background and tracking skills made him a natural choice for law enforcement work, and he eventually became a federal marshal himself, specializing in cases involving missing children and frontier justice. His adoption of Timothy Morrison proved to be one of the most rewarding decisions of his life, as the relationship between the former scout and the orphaned boy grew into a genuine father-son bond that enriched both their lives immeasurably. The story concluded with a reunion 20 years later, when all 7 survivors gathered in Denver to dedicate a monument to children who had died in institutional care throughout the American frontier. By this time, they had all become successful adults with families of their own, but they never forgot the lessons learned during those terrible days in the Colorado desert. Their shared experience had created bonds stronger than blood, and their commitment to protecting vulnerable children had led several of them to careers in law enforcement, medicine, and social work. The monument they dedicated bore the simple inscription, "In memory of those who had no voice, and in honor of those who spoke for them." The final twist in the story came during the dedication ceremony, when investigators revealed that Mrs. Blackwood's conspiracy had been even more extensive than anyone had realized. Evidence discovered in her personal papers indicated that similar schemes had been operating in at least 6 other territories, with a network of corrupt administrators and criminal associates who had been systematically murdering orphan children for financial gain. The exposure of this network led to a nationwide investigation that resulted in dozens of additional arrests and convictions, ultimately saving hundreds of children who might otherwise have suffered similar fates. The desert that had nearly claimed 7 young lives became a symbol of both human cruelty and divine providence, a place where the worst and best of humanity had collided in a struggle that defined the moral character of the American frontier. The children who survived that ordeal carried with them forever the knowledge that they had faced the ultimate test of human endurance and emerged not just alive but stronger, their spirits unbroken despite experiencing abandonment and betrayal that would have destroyed many adults. Their story became a testament to the power of hope, the importance of courage in the face of impossible odds, and the profound difference that one person's decision to act can make in the lives of others.